Florida has never seen a campaign quite like this. Charlie Crist, the Republican governor turned independent, now wild card in the wildest Senate race in the nation.
We're going to change it up a little bit.
Republican Marco Rubio, former State House Speaker, he vows to fight the president's agenda and change the direction in Washington.
I think Washington is wrong.
Democrat Kendrick Meeks, South Florida congressman. He defeated a billionaire to win the Democratic nomination, but loves being an underdog.
I'm going to still be comfortable playing David.
Tonight from Orlando, the heart of America's ultra battleground state, we bring you Florida's ABC News Senate debate. And hello, everyone. I'm George Stephanopoulos of ABC, coming to you from Orlando at the studios of WFTV Channel 9 Eyewitness News. We are here for debate between Florida's 3 Senate candidates that's being broadcast live on ABC stations across this state, also on abcnews.com and on Facebook. This is the first prime-time debate for the 3 candidates, Marco Rubio, Kendrick Meek, and Charlie Crist. And joining me to moderate are Craig Patrick from our host station, also Brendan McLaughlin from ABC Action News Tampa Bay. Welcome to all of you. We've got a pretty loose format. Tonight we're going to have rounds of questions where each candidate has 60 seconds to respond, and the others will have 30 seconds for rebuttal. But we're all going to, make sure you all mix it up, make sure all the questions are answered and are engaged. We are going to begin with the opening statements you all drew for the order. And Governor Crist, you go first.
Thank you very much. I'm running for the United States Senate as an independent because I think Washington is broken, and we need a change of tone in our nation's capital to get it back working for you. Abraham Lincoln once said that the government should be of the people, by the people, and for the people. I believe that's true. Not of the party, by the party, and for the party. That's why I run as an independent. It's abundantly clear to me that there's an extreme right faction in the Republican Party, and I think that I'm the only candidate who can both win in November and crash that Tea Party in Washington. It's time to have common sense back in our nation's capital to fight for our fellow Floridians. You know I will do it because I've done it as your governor. When the extreme right wanted to punish teachers and school children with the bill this past legislative session, I vetoed that bill to stop it for you. When the extreme right wanted to change the way that women would be able to make a decision about their own life and force them to get an ultrasound, force them to pay for it, force them to view it, and then be lectured on it, it was too much to the right. And I used this veto pen, and I stopped it too. I've done it as your governor. I'll do it as your senator. When the extreme right said that they wanted to raise the age of eligibility and restructure how Social Security is distributed to our senior citizens, I said no way. If you want a new voice in Washington, if you want a better way, somebody who will fight for you, the people of our state, instead of the respective parties that my opponents are in, then I would ask for your vote on November 2nd for your next U.S. Senate member. Thank you.
Mr. Meek.
Thank you, George, Brendan, Craig. Thank you, and I want to thank all the ABC affiliates for all the work that you've done to put on this debate. My name's Kendrick Meek. I'm running to be your next United States Senator. And I think Floridians are going to have to take a stand in this election over the next several weeks. If you want a United States Senator that's going to stand with oil companies and the special interests and will stand with health care companies to deny you of health care, then you should vote for Marco Rubio. If you want someone who's going to stand by and be a very weak United States Senator that will not speak up when it's time to speak up, then you need to vote for Governor Crist. But if you want a candidate and a United States Senator that will stand with you against oil companies, not allowing them to drill off the coast of Florida, as I've done, because I'm the only one that's sitting at this table who's done it, or if you want someone who's going to stand by the decisions that have been made as it relates to health care, that insurance companies don't drop you in your greatest time of need, then you're looking at the candidate that will stand up for you. If you want to make sure that we create jobs here in Florida and working with local leaders and making sure that we come up with real solutions that are going to create jobs now and not later, then you're looking at your candidate. If you're looking for a United States Senator that will stand up for the middle class and making sure that the middle class get tax cuts and not grab on to the ideology that my other 2 opponents have embraced their entire political career, that special interests and the super wealthy in this country, somehow the dollars are going to trickle down to the middle class, then you're looking at the candidate that's going to stand on behalf of the middle class and create jobs in this state. I look forward to this debate. I hope that you can make a sound decision as we continue to move forward to November the 2nd. Thank you.
Debate has already started. Mr. Rubio.
Thank you. Thank you guys for hosting this debate and everyone who's watching. You know, America's the greatest country in the history of the world. That didn't happen by accident, and it's not going to continue automatically. What's made America great is that every generation of American before us has confronted and solved the great challenges of their time. And because they did, each generation of American has inherited a better life and a better country. But it's also not going to continue automatically that way. If we want it to be great, we're going to have to do the same. We must confront the challenges of our time. And that's what this election is about. The challenges we face in this nation are extraordinary, and the direction that Washington is taking us is the wrong one. They're taking us, for example, in a direction that will double our national debt in 5 years and triple it in 10. And so what this race is about here in Florida is very simple. Do you want to stay on that road, or do you want to go to a better direction? A direction that will allow us to keep America what it deserves to be, the greatest nation in all of human history. That's the choice here in Florida, and it's very simple. If you like the way things are going in Washington, if you support the direction that Washington's taking America, then I'm probably not your candidate. There are 2 other people running for U.S. Senate who support the direction Washington is going. But if you want your next U.S. Senator to be someone that will stand up to the direction Washington is taking our country and offer a very clear alternative, an alternative that will allow us to leave our children with what they deserve, the greatest nation in human history, well, I'm the only one running that will do that. And that's why I'm asking for your vote.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much. Let's begin the questioning. Mr. Rubio, you get the first question. It's about Social Security, an important issue to Floridians. 1 in 6 Floridians receive Social Security. And Governor Christ put out a tough new ad yesterday that suggests your openness to reforms like raising the retirement age and recalculating the COLA, quote, make people work harder and longer for their money and balance the budget on the backs of seniors. Your response?
My response is it's blatantly untrue, and I think it's important to point that out first and foremost. Every idea that I've ever advocated for Social Security would not impact a single senior in Florida. That is, no one who's over 55 years of age or older would be impacted by any of the ideas that I've put forth. You know, one of those seniors, Governor Christ, that's out there is my mother. She's 80 years old this month. She depends on Social Security. It is her primary source of income. And for you to suggest that I would somehow advocate ideas that would harm her is outrageous and a blatant untruth. It's not true. It's a lie. Now, here's what I do know, George. Social Security's in a lot of trouble. Governor Christ, in May, you said so yourself. Social Security is already paying out more than it takes in. Every year the Congress, which Congressman Meek is a part of, goes in and takes the surplus and raids it, and they use it to pay for other things. And the result is that soon, as more people retire and there are less workers to pay for it, we're going to run into a big problem in Social Security. So there have to be answers to that problem, and I've proposed some. Now, if they've got better ideas about how to save Social Security, they should offer them. They shouldn't lie about my record. They shouldn't lie about my ideas.
He just called you a liar 3 times.
Unbelievable. It was his own words that actually said what he would do with Social Security. He talked about raising the age of eligibility, said it was on the table. He said he would restructure how Social Security is delivered to our people. He's talked about privatization. He's been all over the map on this issue of Social Security. Now, I understand that he may not like what he said before and he's trying to run away from it, but the facts are the facts, and facts are stubborn things. This is what was said. This is what he said to the people of Florida. Now, when he was, still running and hadn't achieved the nomination yet, he had all this hard right stuff that he wanted to talk about all the time. And now he's changed course because we have 26 days to go in this election. But I stand by the ad. It is truthful. It is straightforward. It is honest. And the people of Florida have a right to know what Marco Rubio would do. He would put raising the age of eligibility on the table. He would put privatizing Social Security on the table. I'm the only one in this race who has said that I will protect and preserve Social Security as we know it today. My other opponent, the good congressman, said that he wants to punt it to a commission. And we all know what happens every time you send it to a commission. They raise the age of eligibility and restructure how Social Security is delivered. It was a promise that was made to you. A promise that was made to seniors in our state and throughout the country. A promise that I believe needs to be honored and respected. And if I'm elected to the Senate, I'll do just that for you.
Mr. Meek, who's right here?
Well, I can tell you one thing. If you want to talk about ads, I was the first one to put out the ad saying that I'm the only one that fought against the privatization of Social Security always. Mr. Rubio talked about private accounts in January. Mr. Christ was on the stage with George W. Bush in 2006 when he was talking about privatization of Social Security, and when he ran in 98 against Governor Graham, Senator Graham, saying that we should privatize some of Social Security. I am the only one that fought against George W. Bush when he wanted to privatize Social Security in Congress. I am the only one that has stood against private accounts here. I think it's important when we look at this issue of Social Security, and who's telling the truth here. Mr. Rubio, it was very interesting to see his people kind of spin this whole thing that it's come and gone, this whole private accounts discussion. But he signed pledges that said that he's willing to privatize Social Security. Charlie Crist has a funding source that's really bizarre, saying that we're going to legalize folks and then we're going to pay for the Social Security Trust Fund through that effort. I'm saying let's expand the middle-class workforce so that we can pay into Social Security that will resolve two issues. One, put Floridians back to work. Two, make sure that seniors and those that are under 55 or whatever the magic number is that Marco Rubio is talking about, that's working hard every day, paying into the trust fund, that we don't change the game on them in the middle of the game. I think it's very, very important to note, George, that there's only one candidate here that has a track record of standing up for Social Security. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to say this to every Floridian. If they want to change Social Security, they're going to have to go through me. I'm 6'3", former state trooper. Used to be a football player, and I think it's important that we don't allow this kind of political tailspin on this issue, because 40% of Floridians will go into poverty.
Let's try to wrap this up and then move on to the next round of questioning. On the question of privatization, you've raised some charges as well, and I just want a yes or no answer. Is it still on the table?
It is not, because it doesn't work, because you're taking payers out of the system. And I've said that in March, by the way. In a debate, Governor Chris was sitting right next to me. I said it to the Wall Street Journal. But once again, the governor's mischaracterized my position. He's saying that this impacts seniors. Not a single senior watching this program would be impacted by any of the changes that I've discussed. Not one.
Let's be perfectly clear, if we could, about what Marco Rubio has said about Social Security. Unlike what Congressman Mika said, he has said that he would raise the age of eligibility. He said that. You got to put it on the table. He said everything should be on the table. And if he wants to deny it tonight, so be it. But those are the facts. And that's what he said about this issue. I'm the only one who said that we need to protect and preserve it as it is today.
For clarification purposes, George, since we're clarifying.
10 seconds.
Marco Rubio has said he's open to privatization of Social Security. Charlie Crist has said that he's open to privatization of Social Security. Both had plans to do so. I am the only candidate here that is saying no to privatization of Social Security.
George, we still haven't heard an idea about how to save the system. I mean,
how about expanding the middle-class workforce? How about an idea of standing up for the middle class? I mean, you and Charlie Crist, you speak. What is not creating jobs? Not a plan?
That's not a plan.
Allowing individuals.
That's a goal.
A goal.
Sure.
Well, it's a great goal to have when we have double-digit unemployment, Marco.
Sure
I think it's very important. I think folks want jobs created. They don't want political talk back and forth.
Congressman,
and I think it's very, very
important.
important.
Can I offer it? We want
very,
to talk
very
about a solution.
important.
Congressman, you supported an $800 billion stimulus package which led to higher unemployment.
You're supporting a $700 billion tax cut.
We have got to move. We have got to move on. We're going to get to all these issues. We're going to get to all these issues. You have 10 seconds, and we have to move on.
Thank you, George. I think it's important that we realize where Social Security is today. And let's have a mature discussion about it. Report after report says that it's solvent until 2037 or 2041. I'm an optimist. I'm hopeful that the economy will continue to improve. But I've also offered a plan that can help it that's supported by Robert Reich, Secretary of Labor previously in a previous administration. And it's straightforward and simple. There are 11 to 14 million people, different estimates by different people, that are not American citizens today, not participating in the American economy. If we can find a pathway to earn citizenship for those 11 to 14 million people, they would be paying into the system. And when 2037 or 2041 comes, if in fact Social Security is still being challenged, we have another way and an opportunity to pay for it that provides jobs in a legal sense and is compassionate to immigrants who come to our country.
We got to move on. Craig Patrick.
Governor, the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington named what it considers to be the 12 most crooked candidates in America, and all three of you made that list. Now, I'll assume each one of you will say you don't belong there. But, Governor, based on everything that you know, do either one of your opponents deserve to be ranked or considered among America's most corrupt?
Well, I think you have to look at what the facts are that have been presented. As it relates to Speaker Rubio, I worked with him when he was Speaker. And he put forward things in the budget that I thought were questionable, and it's why I used this veto pen to get rid of them. Whether they're corrupt or not, that's for other people to decide, not me. But he put in $800,000 for an AstroTurf field, for a flag football field that he plays on in Miami, or played on. He also put in millions of dollars that he steered to a university and later got a high-paying job there, and also millions to a hospital that ended up hiring him as a consultant. Is that corrupt? Is it wrong? It's clearly wrong, in my view. That's why I had to veto some things. He also tried to put into the budget, when I was governor and he was the speaker, things for a friend of his that wanted to get business on the turnpike. I had to veto it 3 different times in the budget to get it out of there. People want public servants who are there to serve you. That's how I've always comported and conducted myself as governor, as your attorney general, and as your commissioner of education. That's how I'll comport myself as your United States Senator. You can trust me.
First of all, let's set the record straight. The things he's absolutely said are just not true.
They're
I have
true.
nothing to do with the flag football field, and it's been found by an independent group that's looked at it. Even the Associated Press has
Marco,
reported
you put
that.
$800,000 in the budget. I had to veto it.
Governor, that's not true.
It is true.
The second thing is that he says I steered money. All these things are false allegations. The fact is that the years that I was Speaker, the Florida House consistently offered leaner budgets than the governor offered, leaner budgets than the Senate offered. If you wanted a leaner budget, you should have lined up behind our budget. Our budget was even leaner than yours. But look, this stuff about corruption and name-calling, that's old-school politics, and that's the road they want to go. I think it's interesting the governor says that he wants to go to Washington and get rid of the rancor and the ugly talk in politics, and yet he's participating fully in it. What I think this debate should be about is the future of America. What direction is our country headed? And these gentlemen support the direction Washington is taking our country. Just a moment ago, we heard the governor say he supports amnesty for illegal aliens as a solution to Social Security. There isn't a single serious public policy observer in the country that thinks that's a serious solution. In fact, it's already been called nonsense. So I hope we can have a debate tonight about the issues that matter to the people at home, the issues about the future of our country and the direction that it's headed.
Craig, I think it's important to look at the political discourse that has taken place in this campaign, and the airwaves are full of attacks of family members, governors attacking my mother. You have Mr. Rubio, you have me, you have a lot of folks that have said different things about different candidates in this race. But I can tell you this. The bottom line is, how do we get people back to work? And we started talking in the last series about the middle-class workforce. I think it's important that we expand middle-class jobs, and I don't think it needs to be a trivial issue here, Marco. I think it's important.
I didn't say it was trivial.
I think it's important.
I said you don't have a plan to do it.
Resolve. I don't have a plan to do it.
You think government creates jobs?
No, I don't. I think tax cuts for small businesses create jobs and incentives for local communities to move forward. You said that you would vote against the stimulus. You said you would vote against health care. You said you would vote against projects that can be supported by the office of the United States Senator in helping local communities such as Orlando, Jacksonville, Tampa, Tallahassee, Miami, you name it, helping local communities meet the needs of individuals who need jobs right now. You're saying that you believe in a lot of things that you should say no to. I'm saying that we should say yes in expanding middle-class opportunities in this state, and it's very, very important. I think that you want to be elected to move in national ideology for the conservative right. I'm not on board that train. I'm on board the train of trying to resolve the issues here in Florida. I'm the hardest worker in the city.
Sure, Congressman Meek, the stimulus is a massive failure. By the numbers the administration has given us, you borrowed and spent over $150,000 per job created or saved.
What part of it do you like, Marco? Because you say you like certain parts, and other parts
of the stimulus?
You say you don't.
I think the stimulus is a massive failure. I think what we should have done instead is,
no,
Congressman, if I may.
26,000 teachers should have lost their jobs in this state. You believe that we should have gone into a depression versus
But the bill was never. The bill was not passed as some sort of a bailout of governments. When you guys passed the stimulus, and Governor Chris supported you in the passage of the stimulus, you said the stimulus would stimulate the economy and create jobs. Unemployment in Florida is at 11.7%. 3 million Americans have lost their jobs. Look, let's be very clear, George. I mean, this is one of the examples of the clear choice that voters have in this election. If people are in favor of the stimulus, if they think the stimulus worked, then you got to vote for one of these guys. But if you understand, as I do, and most Americans do, that the stimulus has been a massive failure, that the only thing it has stimulated is the national debt, I'm the only one running on this table here today that would have voted against the stimulus and instead advocated.
I've got to let Governor Chris get a rebuttal on the stimulus, then we have to move on.
Thank you very much. What you've just witnessed is the problem and the reason I'm running as an independent. These two guys are going at each other because one's the Republican right, one's the Democratic left. What's true is there are good things that both parties can present to the future of our country. Let's talk about the stimulus for a second. I accepted it. And the congressman is right.
You support it.
It saved over 20,000 educators their jobs in the state of Florida. I don't know how you can look them in the eye, Marco, and say, I don't care about you. You're not going to have that food on your table for your families. In addition, there were 60,000 more individuals whose jobs were saved because of that stimulus, that recovery money. It's also important to cut taxes. The congressman, again, I think is right when he says that we need to have a tax cut that not only helps the middle class, but also reaches across and extends the tax cuts to those who are small business owners, because that will produce jobs for our people. I'm the only one at this table who can tell you Republicans have some good ideas about reducing spending, cutting taxes. Democrats also have some good ideas about investing in clean energy and technology and doing what's right. If you want somebody to go to Washington and cut through the fog of this partisanship, I'm your guy.
Next round.
Mr. Meek, your former House colleague, Robert Wexler, from your home base in South Florida, recently endorsed your opponent, Charlie Crist, as did influential state senator Al Lawson, and our recent polls show that Charlie Crist is actually drawing more Democratic support than you are. How do you explain the Democrats' soft support for your candidacy and their apparent embrace of a man who just a few months ago declared himself to be the true Republican in the race?
Well, let me share this with you. Recent poll has shown that the governor and I are neck and neck in this race. Okay, we're running. The goal is to be the next United States senator. We cannot allow Marco Rubio to be federalized to represent this state. If he doesn't carry the values that this state needs in the United States Senate to put people back to work. Robert Wexler is a personal friend of Governor Crist. He left office in the middle of his term, came back to Florida to endorse the governor. I have the endorsement not only of the mayor of this city, Buddy Dyer, but several members of the Democratic delegation, and I have a lot of Democratic supporters. I have independent supporters. This race is far from over because I can tell you the governor's, is talking about he's the only one. Marco's saying that he wants to bring about change. I can tell you this, that I am the only one that is sitting here at this table that's willing to stand up to the special interests and have a track record to prove it. And I think that Democratic voters and independent voters and Republican voters, when they look at who's going to go to work for them, they're going to look at me. They're going to know that I'm the candidate that qualified by petition, stood up for educators in this state by bringing about smaller class sizes that both of these individuals were against when they were in the state legislature. Who stood up for the increase in the minimum wage in this state? I did. My other two opponents were against it. And so when you think about the middle class, you think about Democratic voters, who's the pro-choice candidate here? I am, 100%. Who's the pro-environment candidate here? I am, 100%, in protecting against offshore oil drilling. So I think it's very, very important. It's going to become abundantly clear through these debates. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate Brendan sitting here at this table so that we can get these issues on the table and Floridians can see
Governor
who
Crist,
stands for the truth here.
Thank you very much. I think it's important that the viewers understand what we're talking about here. And it is significantly important to understand that I'm very proud that Robert Wexler endorsed my campaign for the United States Senate. He is a friend, and he's been a friend for a long time. He's a great public servant who has served the people well, especially the people in Southeast Florida, and I'm grateful to him for that. Understands the issue of Israel very well, and it's very important to me. In fact, the first trade mission that I took as your governor was to the state of Israel because I understand the unique bond between not only the state of Florida and Israel, but our country. So much so, I actually married a nice Jewish girl. But I think it's really important that you understand that not only did Robert Wexler endorse my campaign for the U.S. Senate, I'm also supported by Robert Dole, a former United States Senator, a true hero, a great American, and I think it illustrates to the people at home the kind of candidacy that I'm putting forward, to offer to people that there is a better way, that we can bring the bipartisanship together to try to fight for the people of Florida. As I said earlier, it's supposed to be of the people, by the people, and for the people. And George Washington addressed the problem we're talking about tonight, this partisanship gridlock that's going on in Washington. In his farewell address, he was the first and last independent president of the United States. And in that address, he said, if we continue to have this partisanship and make the parties get stronger and stronger, we may literally cripple the country we have just created. We're there. Washington is crippled. They can't get anything done. They can't get anything done on tax cuts. Look at what's happening right now. The Democratic president of the United States has proposed tax cuts, and the Republicans, of all people, won't do it.
We're going to get to that, Mr. Rubio.
Let me just say this, a couple of things. First of all, Kendrick Meek talked about my values. My values are pretty straightforward. I know that jobs aren't created by politicians. They're created by everyday people that start a business or expand an existing business. The job of government is to make it easier for them to do that, not harder. And Washington is making it harder through policies that both Congress can make and Governor Crist support. I believe the federal government should not spend more money than it takes in and continue to grow our debt. And yet both of these gentlemen have supported policies that do that. And finally, I believe the world is a safer place when America is the strongest country in the world. Those are my values. I think the values of Congressman Meek can be found in his voting record. His voting record is virtually identical to Nancy Pelosi's. And Governor Crist was a Republican 6 months ago. Now he's changed his position on virtually every issue because he's trying to take away those Democratic votes from Kendrick Meek. I think people deserve a senator that's going to go to Washington, D.C., stand up to the direction they're taking our country and offer an alternative. And in this race, I'm the only one that's offering to do that.
Let's get to the next round. Big issue, health care in the country. And Mr. Crist, this one is for you. Marco Rubio has accused you of taking 6 different positions on health care. You were originally opposed to the measure. You called for its repeal. At one point, you said you would have voted for it, then said you misspoke. and now your position seems to be that it shouldn't be repealed but fixed. So try to clear this up. Are you for President Obama's reform or against it? Would you repeal it? How would you fix it?
I'm against it. I think we have to fix it. There are parts of it that are good, and there are parts of it that need to be changed. The parts of it that are good and that I think ought to remain are the fact that they take away what I would call the health insurance company discriminatory policy, whereby if you have a pre-existing condition, you don't get coverage. One of the other things that I think are good in the bill is the fact that it allows young people up to the age of 26 to be able to continue to be covered by their parents' policy if that's in it. The things that I don't like about the bill that need to be fixed and wouldn't let me support it are the fact that it takes about $500 billion out of Medicare Advantage. Particularly in a state like Florida, that's bad. I also think something that's bad in the bill, it's too much tax, it's too much mandate. And all of that leads to the conclusion that it must be fixed and it must be done right. Now, my opponent, Marco Rubio, talks about the fact that, we have to repeal it, and, they use different words to talk about it. But he's also talked about, women's right. This is a health issue, too. He's talked about the fact that you're not pro-life unless you want to repeal Roe versus Wade, overturn Roe versus Wade, so you wouldn't have that choice anymore. As the congressman knows, I'm pro-life, but I'm also pro-woman. I think that's an extremist view. Marco, I think it's the wrong thing. I mean, wanting to punish teachers, wanting to punish women, wanting to punish seniors by raising the age of eligibility. You haven't been drinking the Kool-Aid, my friend. You've been drinking too much tea, and it's just wrong. And that's why we have to have less partisanship, and we have to do what's right for the people.
Well, first of all, again, he's once again misrepresented my position on the issue of Social Security. But beyond that, let's talk about this health care bill that the governor says has really good parts to it. I think this health care bill is a disaster. Just in the last 2 weeks, we've learned the following things. These child-only policies are being dropped. We've learned that low-wage, part-time workers are now going to lose their coverage. We've learned that seniors are starting to get dropped out of Medicare Advantage. We've learned that premiums are going to go up. In fact, this bill has broken every promise that was made when Kendrick Meek and Charlie Crist supported. This is the promise that they've broken. They said it wouldn't raise premiums on anybody. We now know that that's not true. They said it would help save Medicare. We know that that's not true. They said it would lower the cost of health care. They say that that's not. Now we know that that's not true. This bill is a disaster. It cannot be saved. It must be repealed and replaced with common sense ideas that allow individual Americans to buy health insurance from any company in America that will sell it to them across state lines, that will allow individuals to have the same tax benefit their employer has when their employer buys it for them, that will allow small companies and associations to pool together with others and together provide insurance for their members. These are common sense ideas that will help insure people and cost a lot less money and certainly wouldn't have the disastrous impact that this bill that these gentlemen support has had.
You voted for it.
I voted for it, and I'll vote for it again if I had the opportunity. I think it's very important that you pay very close attention what Marco Rubio is saying. Everything that he identified of saying that insurance premiums will go up, co-pays will go up, individuals will be dropped. That's what the insurance companies did a year ago and the year before that. And now they're using the health care bill as an excuse to do what they've always done. They're running scared right now. The fact that 85% of the Medicare dollar has to go towards the patient care. The fact that prescription drug companies have to discount drugs to seniors now even more. And the fact that we have small businesses that are getting a tax cut right now. So when you hear Marco Rubio and Charlie Crist talk about what they like as though they will go, in some sort of breakfast bar and pick the raisins out of the raisin bread and say these are the parts of the bread I like and leave the rest behind, I think you have to I think everyone has to understand that this issue here. When you have a family member in the hospital looking up at popcorn ceiling and they're sick, an insurance company cut their coverage, then you need a United States Senator that's going to stand in the gap. Charlie Crist can talk all he wants to about being tough, but I'm not going to take any advice from anyone who bailed out of a Republican primary and did not face up to Marco Rubio. He wants to run a primary all over again. I think it's important that you have a United States Senator that's going to be there for you, it's going to be there for you in the time of need. And I think it's important to note that both of these candidates are willing to roll back something that we've worked very hard for, to be able to protect everyday people against these insurance companies. They want to empower the insurance companies all over again. I am the only one here that understands that 3,500 Floridians lose their insurance every week. That's a fact. That's not fiction. And so when they're talking about going back, they both have insurance.
Quick rebuttals from each of you first.
Yeah, if I could just talk about what we've done here in Florida. We introduced a plan called Cover Florida. Cover Florida says that if you don't have insurance, and about 4 million of our fellow Floridians do not, or you've recently lost your job, that you can get coverage that's less expensive than it would have been before. Before Cover Florida, it would have cost about $600–700 a month to get an insurance plan. After Cover Florida, and we negotiated with these insurance companies, it's down to about $150 in order to be able to get insurance coverage. How'd we do it? No government mandates, no tax increases. We negotiated hard with insurance companies, as the congressman talked about, in order to fight for you. That's what you need, I think, in a good government official, somebody who looks out for you, not for the party first, fights for you to get a better deal. And it's what you deserve.
Well, again, on health care, it's just another example of what I said at the outset of this debate today. I'm the only candidate that will stand up to Washington in the direction that they're taking us and offer a clear alternative. It's a fact. If I had been in Washington, I would not have voted for this bill. In fact, not only did Congressman Meek vote for this bill, he actually voted for an even more radical one that was proposed earlier that actually would have created a public option, basically one step towards a single-payer system. You're absolutely right, Congressman Meek. I would never have voted for this bill. I would have voted for an alternative that would help insure a lot more people, but certainly wouldn't turn over the health care industry
to the government.
Mr. Meek, I want you to speak to a quote about Ronald Reagan. Quote, Democrats had gotten complacent, fat and happy, thought that you could come up with a government program to solve every problem. Ronald Reagan called for a leaner, more effective government, and that was the right message then. That's a quote from President Barack Obama. Do you agree with the president? Did Reagan have the right message then? And why or why not is it the right message now?
We should have a leaner and meaner, leaner government right now. But I think it's important to note that we did have 8 years of an administration that both of these gentlemen are fighting to bring back. Dick Cheney and others who decided to give this kind of trickle-down economics that will help the middle class. The facts are that middle-class families are earning less, 5% less than they earned. They earned since these Bush policies have been in place. Marco Rubio is advocating those policies. Charlie Crist are advocating those policies. This is not a party issue. This is standing up for the middle class. I think it's important to note when we look at this issue of health care, and I'm shocked that Marco Rubio would even use the word radical, because I guess he's been called that quite a bit, that you have to look at what's happening in real Florida. Real Florida people don't have insurance. Charlie Crist sits here and talks about Cover Florida. It does everything but that. Less than 10,000 enrollees, 19 million Floridians, and we have individuals who don't have insurance right now. And these guys are sitting here as though it's another day at the office. We have a crisis right now in the state of Florida and in this country. And we need leaders that are going to stand up for those everyday people who punch in and punch out every day.
Marco Rubio, then Charlie Crist.
I think when we look at this, George, we have to look at it from the standpoint of who wants to go to the Senate and make it work. I'm leaving a very safe House seat to run for the United States Senate because I'm frustrated with all of the no and the filibuster and all of the things that are going on in the Senate that has this country on lockdown and have families suffering right now. And I think it's very important that we look at the facts versus fiction. Now, we can sit around here and spin this around all we want to, but in the final analysis, it comes down to who has health care insurance and who doesn't.
Let's get an answer.
And it comes down to who's going to expand middle-class opportunities in this country.
Sure. First of all, I believe Washington's broken and both parties are to blame. And let's remind everybody that when I first got into this race a year and a half ago, I was 30 points down in the polls. The Republican establishment did not endorse me. They actually endorsed Governor Crist. They raised him a bunch of money that he was refused to refund. It's still sitting in his bank account. I believe both parties are to blame for what's going on in Washington. And I'm going up there hopefully not to repeat the mistakes of the past, but to stand up to the direction that Washington is taking us and offer a clear alternative. As far as facts are concerned, on the health care bill, the facts are clear. The fact is that this bill is a disaster. It has broken every promise that it has made to the American people. The fact is that on the stimulus bill, it's been a disaster. They've borrowed and spent $150,000 per job that they claim they have saved or created. This is a bill that's grown our national debt by $800 billion, and our children and grandchildren are going to work their whole lives to pay it off, and yet unemployment is higher, 3 million jobs have been lost in America, 200,000 jobs lost in Florida since it passed. This is yet another example of it's very simple in this race. If you like Obamacare, if you like the stimulus plan, you can vote for Charlie Crist or Kendrick Meek. I'm probably not your candidate. But if you want your next U.S. Senator to be someone that stands up to these sorts of things and offers clear alternatives, I'm the only one running that will.
Yeah, well, let's talk about what the facts are. Marco Rubio just talked about the fact that, when he was running in the Republican primary, that he really didn't get much support, and it changed. Things changed. And I want to explain to the people of Florida why I'm running as an independent. He says both parties are to blame. Well, I think both parties are to blame. That's why I'm running as an independent. My former party said such extreme things that Marco Rubio has embraced, such as overturning Roe versus Wade, hurting senior citizens with the Social Security program, not supporting public school teachers. That's extreme, it's radical, and it's wrong. And I couldn't be comfortable with it anymore, and it wasn't honest with myself to stay in that party. So I left the building. And I'm happy to be running as an independent where I only have my allegiance to you. Not to party bosses in Washington when I get there, only to the people of Florida if you're kind enough to send me there. I think that's the kind of leadership people want. I think that's the kind of senator you deserve.
Next round, Brendan McLaughlin.
Mr. Rubio, you have called for the extension of the Bush tax cuts for all income categories, including those earning more than $250,000 a year in family income. Even though experts have said that eliminating that tax break for the highest income earners would reduce our structural deficit by up to a quarter. You've talked a lot about the deficit being this corrosive, dangerous, critical problem for our country. If that's the case, why are you willing to essentially borrow hundreds of billions of dollars to provide these tax cuts to the wealthiest 2 or 3% of Americans?
Well, first of all, let's be clear about a couple things about what you just said. The first thing is that the Bush tax cuts are the current tax code. It's what the taxes are now. And what I have said, and what a growing number of Democrats have begun to say, is that it's a bad idea to raise taxes on everybody, on anybody at this time in such an economic downturn. That's not just me saying it. You know who says that now? The gubernatorial candidate is a Democrat in the state, Alex Sink. A growing number of colleagues of Kendrick Meeks in the House as Democrats have begun to agree with our position on this as well. Here's the bottom line. Our debt problem going forward is not because the American people aren't paying enough in taxes. Our debt problem going forward is because Washington can't control spending. In fact, on the rate that we're going right now, within the next 5 years, this deficit's going to double, and we actually could trigger a downgrade in our bond rating, and within 10 years, it could triple. And we're going to, here's the scariest part. By 2015, our annual deficit could be $2.1 trillion, and $900 billion of that, $900 billion would be interest. That's outrageous.
I'm still not sure what your justification is, though, for adding that on to
Well, I'll tell you what the justification is. We have to do two things at the same time here. Number one is we have to grow our economy. And the way you grow your economy is by creating a stable and affordable tax code. And that's what the current tax code does. And that's why it should be extended. And the second thing we need to do is reduce spending. And that's why I've advocated rolling back discretionary spending and freezing it, a balanced budget amendment. And we have to do both things. I think that's the part Washington's gotten wrong. They haven't done both things. We must do both things because that's the only thing that will work.
Mr. Meek?
I think it's important to pay very, very close attention to what Mr. Rubio is saying here. He's willing to give billionaires and millionaires and even companies, both have signed a pledge of giving companies that ship jobs overseas tax breaks, continue to take away from the U.S. worker. It's okay with Mr. Rubio to put on the backs $700 billion of additional debt that will be on the backs of the middle class, and that their children and their grandchildren will have to pay that debt back. The Bush tax cuts for the super wealthy came about as some sort of insert within the bill almost 10 years ago. It wasn't something that George W. Bush ran on. It was something that just happened. No one were saying, billionaires weren't holding signs saying, please give me a tax cut, please give me a tax cut. They got it through the kind of ideology that Marco Rubio represents, the kind that Charlie Crist endorsed and still endorse. I think it's very, very important to note that there's only one candidate that's sitting here that's willing to stand up for the middle class, to be able to level that playing field. I mean, the old school politics of saying that if you can write a big fat campaign check, that you get accountability, that you walk into some of these big homes here in Florida and throughout the country and saying, don't worry, I'll protect things, I'll make sure everything's okay. I'm the only person that's willing to stand up and take the responsible role. I'm the only candidate here that has voted for a pay-go bill that will allow us to pick up policy. If we're going to spend it, we're going to show how we're going to pay for it, and I think it's going to bring us back on the fiscal discipline.
Where do you stand on this question of extending the tax cuts for the wealthy?
I support it. I support it. I think that this is absolutely the wrong time to raise taxes on anybody. I've never voted for a new tax during my entire career. You know, Marco Rubio, early in his career, voted to raise property taxes. Let me repeat that. Voted to raise property taxes in his career. Now, I think what we've done in Florida, we've lived within our means. We have to. We have a constitution that requires us to live within our means. As governor of the state of Florida, I reduced the budget by over $7.4 billion. I signed into law, as your governor, the single largest tax cut in the history of Florida. And I understand what it means to veto earmarks. I had to do it to Speaker Rubio. You know, he sent to me in the first budget when I was governor and he was speaker about $500 million in earmarks that I had to veto. That kind of earmark expertise that Washington embraces, you don't have to send Marco Rubio to Washington. He's already gone Washington. That's exactly what we don't need up there right now. What we need is to rein in spending, exercise some fiscal discipline, make sure that we send somebody to Washington that appreciates the value of a dollar of the hardworking people that sit at home and watch tonight.
I want to answer, but just quickly on the question of earmarks, which you just raised.
Well, they're once again false, George. I mean, number one, on the issue that he's never raised taxes, it's absurd. He broke a pledge never to raise taxes. He just raised taxes in Florida by $2 billion just a year ago. On the issue of earmarks, Governor, my budget was leaner than yours both years that I was the Speaker of the House. You should have just lined up and endorsed our budget. And as far as Congressman Meek is concerned, the things he's saying, these tax increase, Congressman, aren't just on individuals. They're on S corporations, small businesses that create jobs, small businesses like a restaurant I was in last week where the guy told me he's not hiring more people until he's sure that the folks in Washington aren't going to raise his taxes. And so I think that's why a growing number of Americans, Democrats, Republicans, all across the political spectrum, have decided that the direction that Nancy Pelosi and you and others want to take our country is the wrong direction.
Yeah,
I think we have to be very clear here, George.
Just 10 seconds.
I have to
His
do a
response,
quick
then we gotta move
response,
on.
but I think it's very, very important. Only 2 to 3% of those that are in that tax bracket actually create jobs. I'm willing to look at that. But you want to take us back to Dick Cheney days. You want those individuals to get tax cuts that we can't afford and can't pay for. We got the car out of the ditch. You want the keys back. You want to drive it back into the ditch and make sure that these special interest groups get their tax cut. I'm going to stand there for the middle class, people that are paying a lot of taxes in this state. And I think it's very, very important that we have leaders that are willing to stand up to those individuals in this state, and I'm guarantee you, George, that I'm one of those individuals.
Chris,
my history
we have to move on, but you get it very quick.
Very quickly. The Speaker said that he didn't put these earmark items into the budget. Are you telling us here tonight that you didn't put $800,000 in for AstroTurf on a field, in a football field that you play at
Governor,
back
not
home?
only
I vetoed it.
Yeah, not only am I willing to tell you that, but I think PolitiFact and independent journalists that have studied the issue have said I had nothing to do with putting that in there. The fact of the matter is, Governor, that the budgets that I proposed as Speaker spent less money than the budgets you proposed as Governor. Why didn't you sign on to our budgets?
I had to cut $500 million out of the pork that you sent me as Governor of the state of
Governor,
Florida.
why didn't you line up behind our budget? Our budget didn't have that in there.
That's what you sent
Our
to me.
budget didn't have that in there.
He's gone Washington.
We got to move on to the next round. I want to move to foreign policy. The question is for you, Mr. Meek, and it's very simple. Do you think the war in Afghanistan can be won? How do you define victory? And do you believe that President Obama should begin withdrawing troops next July, even if that victory hasn't been achieved?
I think it's very important to note the discussion is going on right now to trying to find some sort of truth between the Taliban and Afghans are very, very important. I think some of the minerals that have been found by the U.S. military should be commended and should be a part of this discussion. Going after Osama bin Laden is very, very important. Need to be captured, killed, what have you. The intelligence that we have picked up, on-the-ground intelligence, is very, very important. But I think the redeployment of our men and women in middle of next year or the beginning of next year is pivotal. Every time,
even
George,
if there is no victory, and how do you define it?
Well, the question is defining victory. Is it killing Osama bin Laden? Is it making sure that we bring about the Taliban and capture all of the individuals that are involved? It's a very slippery slope. But one thing I do know, George, is that we have military families that are here, even many military families that live within Florida, that need their loved ones back home, that want their fathers back home, want their mothers back home. No one really thinks about them in this process. And as I've ran for the United States Senate since January of 2009, I have encountered a number of military families saying, sir, and I served on the Armed Services Committee 6 of my 8 years on the Armed Services, in Congress. And I talk to these individuals, and they're real, live, breathing individuals. And they're concerned about the fact that we clap for them when they walk through the airport. But who's clapping when these guys and gals are sitting in VA centers throughout the state of Florida waiting 2 hours for care? And that's what we have to think about when we think about this whole issue of war and how we find a responsible redeployment.
So just to be clear, because I want to get a response from Mr. Rubio, redeployment begins next July regardless of conditions on the ground.
Well, our allies will be redeploying at that time, too. And I think it's very important that we start looking at that.
Just first thing, the Congressman is absolutely right. We first need to thank and congratulate our troops and express our gratitude, because you're absolutely right. These are the bravest and finest young men and women that our country has. Our family knows this firsthand. My brother was Special Forces Army during the Vietnam era, and that we know the strain that puts a family through. That being said, the war in Afghanistan is extremely important that we be successful. And this is how we define success, I believe. It's by providing a level of security on the ground, which I think General Petraeus and the President are going to be successful at doing, if they commit themselves to doing it, as I believe that they and hope that they have, to provide a level of security on the ground so that the Afghan people can establish for themselves a government that functions and create institutions and civil society that work. And let me explain why that's important. Number one, we don't ever want Afghanistan to ever again become a base of operations for the Taliban or any terrorists. But even more frightening is that Afghanistan could become a base of operations to destabilize Pakistan. And Pakistan is a nuclear power. It's a nuclear state. And the notion that Pakistan could fall into the hands of a Taliban-like regime is absolutely unacceptable. And that's why it's so critical that we succeed in Afghanistan.
I think we all can agree that we have a deep and abiding and appropriate respect for the people who serve in our military. Florida is a state that has a significant number of military bases, more than 20 installations throughout Florida. We have a Department of Veteran Affairs in my administration, and I'm very proud that former Leroy Collins was serving in that before he was tragically killed recently. It is important, I think, for us to realize what the question being posed is. What's happening in Afghanistan? Is it being successful? Is it appropriate to remove the troops next summer? I think that all of us have agreed that General Petraeus is an excellent military leader. I know him personally. I've had the opportunity to get to know him when he was based in Tampa. I think it was the right move for the President of the United States to put him in place after General McChrystal left. I also think it's important that success is defined by security. It's defined by safety. The first line of our Constitution, and our Founding Fathers talked about it, was that the duty of government is to ensure domestic tranquility. That's what's being talked about here. We have to make sure that nuclear weaponry does not expand around the globe. First and foremost, we have to make sure that that doesn't happen in Iran with Ahmadinejad. He's a madman, and our responsibility and our duty as a friend and ally to Israel makes it incumbent upon us to keep our attention and monitor the situation there as well.
I want to move on, but let me just make sure we clarify the differences here. You say redeployment begins next July. Basically,
we have the discussion of redeployment in the beginning of first quarter, second quarter of next year. As these two gentlemen mentioned, security is very, very important.
And you want to pursue success. You say reassess at that time.
No, I don't. I think the artificial timeline that's been set up...
That's what I'm saying.
No, I think it undermines our mission. I think the enemy knows... If the enemy knows when you're going to leave, how can you be successful?
He supports a timeline. You're against
I do not.
I
think an artificial timeline is false.
I think it's appropriate for the President, the Commander-in-Chief, to let the American people understand when he wants to achieve that success. And if at that time, in concert with the discussion and advice and counsel of General Petraeus, they feel it's the right time to come home, then that should be done.
You'll follow General Petraeus' recommendation. Okay, let's move on.
Mr. Rubio, as you know, we're developing a high-speed rail that would link Orlando and Tampa Bay into one of the largest economic markets in the world and clearly create jobs. But you also want to cut discretionary non-defense spending back to the levels of 2 years ago. How can we possibly have both, or are you willing to tell the folks here in Florida, right here, right now, that if you win, high-speed rail may have to wait?
Well, let me tell you this. There's no shortage of good programs you can spend money on. I mean, you can come up with a long list of things the federal government can spend money on and worthy projects, but nothing is more important than dealing with this long-term debt issue. It is simply unsustainable. And that's not just me saying it. That's the President's advisors telling him that this long-term debt problem our country faces is simply unsustainable. And that's a priority over virtually everything else our country faces. In fact, the national debt is not just a domestic issue. Even people like Hillary Clinton and the leading military commander in this country have said that the national debt has a significant national security component, that our enemies dream of a Greece-like day of reckoning for America as much as they do another 9/11. So this national debt issue has to be confronted and solved. It is perhaps the predominant issue facing our country along with economic growth.
And at the expense of high-speed rail, it would leave us with a down payment with a rail line to nowhere.
Well, again, that's the problem with the decisions that have been made in Washington up to this point. And that they are going to borrow money that we don't have and leave the IOU to our children and our grandchildren, something that no generation of American has ever done. And again, it's another example of the dramatic choice in this race. If you like that kind of behavior from Washington, D.C., if you think Washington is placing us in the right direction when it comes to debt spending, then you're probably not going to vote for me. You should vote for Congressman Meek, whose voting record is identical to Nancy Pelosi's. You should vote for Governor Christ, who was willing to go along with all those sorts of things if it's politically expedient. But if you want your next U.S. Senator to be someone that will stand up and say, look, this national debt issue is the most serious issue we face and we must solve it, I'm the only one running that's going to do that.
Let me tell you, when you're the governor of a state the size of Florida, the fourth largest state in the country, and you realize that a couple years ago the economy literally fell off a cliff, you have to lead and you have to strike a balance. That's leadership. Now, when the president came to Fort Myers, I was proud to go there and welcome him to my state for the first time since he had been sworn in as president. We needed the funds that were allocated in order to keep us from losing jobs. As I said earlier, 20,000 educators in our state would not have employment if that hadn't happened. 60,000 additional Floridians tonight, maybe watching this show, wouldn't have a paycheck coming to their home. The high-speed rail, Craig, that you mentioned, we worked on very hard in our administration. 3 different times I called a special session to get it done. Fortunately, the third try was the charm. That gave us an additional $1.25 billion, the down payment that you mentioned, of Florida tax dollars that had gone to Washington that I fought to get back here for our fellow Floridians to improve our transportation. Every time $1 billion is spent on infrastructure, the argument is that it will create 28,000 new jobs for people. It's all about jobs, jobs, jobs. And I understand you have to have a blend of these things in order to do what's right, and that's called leadership.
Mr. Meek?
Again, George, I'm glad that we're having this debate here tonight so Floridians can see who stands on solid ground. I think Mr. Rubio means what he says. The fact that he's willing to make sure that people from Tampa to Orlando to Daytona to South Florida sit in traffic for the next 20 years. He wants to make sure that he stands up on behalf of the right-wing ideology that he stands on. Charlie Crist stands on a wet paper box as it relates to the issues that he stands for, because you don't know where he is. And he did not provide the leadership to bring those resources back here. I'm the only candidate that actually stood up and voted for the stimulus to make sure that we did not go into a depression, to bring a floor so that we could stop the recession. To be able to stop the depression from taking place. I think it's very, very important that we understand in this race that high-speed rail will create over 20,000 jobs for this state. This is where the rubber meets the road. Marco Rubio just said that he would stand with Dick Cheney and George DeMint, Senator DeMint, and all of these right-wing members of Congress and the federal government, once upon a time, speaking of Dick Cheney, that he's willing to stand with them. He's not willing to stand with those construction workers that are sitting at home right now. He's not willing to take a stand on comprehensive immigration reform that will make sure that individuals that are here undocumented, that they no longer take the jobs from those that are citizens and those that are residents here in this country.
Sorry, but we've got to get to the final round. I think it's very, very important that we look at this.
This question is for Governor Crist. We are one of the few states in Florida that have a ban on gay adoption. It's been long-standing. You supported that ban, saying at one point that you believe traditional mother and father to adopt is best. The appeals court recently found that to be unconstitutional, right. And you called that decision great, and you've stopped enforcing the ban on gay adoption. Would you clarify for the voters what your position is on two things, gay adoption in Florida and the don't ask, don't tell policy in the armed forces?
Be happy to. And this is very important. You're talking about individuals' lives, how they live their lives. Some people in Washington on the radical right want to tell people who they should love and who they shouldn't. DeMint was raised by, Senator DeMint was raised by Congressman Meek, and he talks about who should be able to teach our children and who shouldn't, based on their sexual persuasion. That's unconscionable. That man, Senator DeMint, first guy who endorsed our opponent, Marco Rubio. That's where he's coming from, that part of the party, that extreme, radical, right part of the party. What we need to have is common sense and what's right for the child. When I was saying that it wasn't appropriate to have that adoption, it was because that was the law in the books in our state. I was the Attorney General of Florida. I understand enforcing the law and respecting it. And you're right, when the court changed it, they changed it by a district court of appeal. A 3-judge panel unanimously changed it and said, that law is unconstitutional. Well, that is in line with what I talked about when I ran for governor, even in the Republican primary, that I'm a live and let live kind of guy. You want to know where I stand? I am a fiscal conservative and a social moderate. I really believe in less government and more freedom. I don't want to impose my will on other people. Even though I'm pro-life, I vetoed that bill that would have required an ultrasound. But I also understand that we need to live within our means. I'm the only guy at this table who can do that.
Mr. Rubio.
Well, first of all, I think it's always funny to listen to the governor attack me for positions he himself held just 6 months ago when he was trying to be the biggest conservative in the world and win the Republican primary. I think that's the first thing we need to point out. The second thing we need to point out is that the governor talks about leadership when he was the governor, or has been the governor of the state of Florida. Governor, virtually everything in Florida is worse off today than it was 4 years ago when you took over. 800,000 jobs have been lost since you took over as governor. 200,000 of them were lost since you supported the stimulus. Florida was once one of the strongest economies in the country. Now only California and Nevada are worse off. And you broke your pledge never to raise taxes last year when you signed a bill that raised $2 billion in new taxes and fees. Those are the facts. The other thing that all this discussion brings to mind and to light is the dramatic choice that we have here in Florida. It appears that for every problem America is facing, the solution that Kendrick Meek and Charlie Crist offer is either a government spending program or a tax increase. Virtually every problem a country faces can be solved by a tax increase or a government spending program, according to them. I don't stand for that. And if you want a U.S. senator that believes in that, then you're going to vote for one of them.
Just to clarify, I think it's important to note that I am the only candidate sitting here at this table that's endorsed by the pro-choice community because I am a pro-choice policymaker. I am the only candidate that has stood up for the middle class and will continue to stand up for the middle class. The reason why I'm going to win this race is the fact that everyday Floridians can identify with me. It's really mind-boggling. It's beyond an explanation for the governor to stand here and do more than the Potomac two-step. I mean, he is saying that he was the, how would you say, the George Governor Wallace when it came down to gay adoptions in this state. For all of the kids that are in foster care right now that are looking for homes, he said he thought it was inappropriate. When he ran against Jim Davis in in 06, he said that Jim Davis didn't have the values that he possessed. That's not in the state statute. That's his opinion. You need a leader that's going to stand on behalf of the people of the state of Florida in a time of need, not when it's politically convenient for them. Marco Rubio has raised another good point here. The fact that he's willing to go along with the Tea Party and everyone else that's on the radical right on issues versus standing with Floridians.
I got to stop you there. We have less than a minute left, but he just called you Governor Wallace. I want you to take 15 seconds to respond.
Well, my name's
I
Governor
didn't call him
Crist.
Governor Wallace. I just said that he stood in the schoolhouse door on this issue, and for him to turn around and say,
Am I the one that gets to answer this,
great.
George?
Let him
Great. I mean,
Listen,
come on,
nobody's
get
fought
outta
harder
here.
for minorities in this state than I have.
It
You know,
has
I
nothing
fought
to do
for
with
civil
minorities,
rights change
Governor.
on the law.
It has
I'm
nothing to do with it.
just
I'm
talking
just saying
about
that you
he
stood
talked about-
firm on this issue of gay adoption, and now you want to be the biggest cheerleader for gay adoption.
Literally 10 seconds.
I hope the people at home understand what's going on here. If you want somebody on the far right, you got Marco Rubio. The far left, you have Kendrick Meek. If you want
sounds
somebody
like a
who wants to
closing
fight for you and apply common
This
sense,
is,
I'm your guy.
it's really interesting.
We could go on for all night, but we have 15 seconds left. Gentlemen, thank you all very much. It was a stimulating debate. Thank you, my colleagues here. For all of us at ABC News, have a good night.
Thank you.
Weigh in on what you saw tonight on abcnews.com. We'll see you later.
Hey, all right.